Welcome to another presentation of Tech for Everyone, free training in tech provided by t2g.net. If you've got a question about tech, email us at t2g@gmail.com. We promise to answer you. Well, today's presentation is all about the motherboard. Anywhere you go in the PC or tech world, you'll hear people talking about motherboards. So we really do need to know what's going on. We're going to find out what motherboard form factors exist, what components are found on a motherboard, and where are they located. So let's jump in. I suppose the question that we've got to start with is, what is a motherboard? Well, here's a photograph of a standard motherboard, and you can see that there are lots of components all over the board itself. And of course, most people recognize a motherboard as basically a circuit board connecting all of these components together. Why do we need to connect them together? And what are they? We've got things called transistors, capacitors, integrated circuits, all peppered around this motherboard. And they're all connected with conduction tracks to allow all the PC components to communicate with each other. And that's very important indeed. When it comes to motherboards, we also have to consider form factors, and that's the basic design of the motherboard. What are the popular form factors that exist? Well, looking at this motherboard here, I want you to pay very close attention to these slots here. You'll notice that we've got these tabs at the end, and we've also got some more slots over here. Now, if you look at it carefully, you'll be able to see that these slots here form a wonderful right angle with these slots over here. And that's important to remember, because the first form factor that we're going to talk about is the ATX, the Advanced Technology Extended Board. It's the most popular form factor. You go and buy a motherboard today, it'll probably be an ATX board. The key thing to remember when identifying it is this 90-degree angle or right angle. The memory slots, that's what these are always at a right angle to the expansion slots over here. The other kind of board is a little different. Let's see what we can remember. Over here, yes, that's a set of memory slots. You can see the tabs. And we've got our expansion slots over here, but it's very interesting. They're not at a right angle. In fact, they're parallel to each other. And this over here is a CPU socket, and you can see that it's at a very strange angle. This is the BTX Balanced Technology Extended Board. And what you'll notice is that the CPU socket is at a 45-degree angle to the memory slots right here. And that's how you've got to remember how to identify it. Also, the memory, there they are, and the expansion slots are parallel to each other. Now, unfortunately, the BTX board is not so popular anymore. It was designed primarily to improve airflow over the chip, but for whatever reason, it fell out of popularity. Now we're going to start talking about the components on the motherboard in a little more detail. And we start with the basic input-output system chip, or the BIOS chip. It's a photograph of the BIOS over here. And it's very important because it stores configuration information about your machine. And that will include things like time and date, the boot order, passwords, and any other configuration changes you make to your hardware. Now, because this is so important, those changes, all those settings, need to be stored even if the PC is powered down or unplugged. So we're going to need something else, and that something else is this CMOS battery. Now, don't worry about CMOS. It stands for complementary metal oxide semiconductor, but that's not too important right now. The important thing to remember is that all those configuration settings in the BIOS are stored because the battery ensures that there is always a charge to the BIOS, keeping those settings alive, so to speak. In fact, one of the things when it comes to troubleshooting your PC, if you notice that the time settings aren't always what they should be, it's probably because you need to change your CMOS battery. So try and remember that. There are smaller components on a motherboard. We can see some of them over here. They're too many to count, and some of them are so small that it would be hard to identify them individually. In particular, I'm talking about the transistors, and all transistors are tiny electronic switches built onto the motherboard that control the flow of current. You've also got capacitors, these cylindrical-like objects over here, and they store charge. And you've also got these rectangular, they're normally dark in color, and they're flat, integrated circuits. And they're made up of millions of transistors. They're designed to perform a specific function. And we're going to talk about some important integrated circuits in a moment. The problem with these devices is that because they're soldered to the board, if they go faulty, you're probably going to have to buy a new board. It's probably cheaper than trying to get it repaired. Now, we know that any computer system will have a hard drive and optical drives. How do we attach these to our motherboard? Well, on any kind of modern motherboard, we have the Serial Advanced Technology attachment, and you can see a very nice photograph of the SATA ports. Notice that they have this characteristic L shape in the middle. That's important to remember when trying to identify them. As I said, they connect hard drives as well as optical drives to the motherboard, and they come in a variety of speeds. SATA 1 is around 3 gigabits per second, and SATA 3 is a whopping 6 gigabits per second. Very fast indeed. We also have a variety of expansion slots on any standard motherboard. We've come back to this photograph here, and to the left you can see a variety of expansion slots. They're primarily used for adding devices such as graphics cards and sound cards, but not exclusively, of course. They come in various sizes. You can see on the left here we've got some PCI slots which are quite long, and we've got some smaller ones over here. Without a doubt, the most popular expansion slot is the PCI Express, because its bus is very, very fast indeed. It's also possible that on a modern motherboard you will find, or you will still find, the original PCI slots. Less likely that you'll find the original AGP slot, which was designed just for graphics cards alone. Now, we were talking about integrated circuits, and this next photograph is of just that. A very important integrated circuit that forms what's referred to as the chipset. This particular chip is called the North Bridge, and its job is to control the CPU, the memory, and the high-end graphics slot. It's a general coordinator, so it ensures that those devices talk to each other in the way that they should. The second half of the chipset is made up of the South Bridge, and that's the controller for all the other devices on the motherboard. And that will include things like the input-output ports, the expansion slots, and even the BIOS. No motherboard comes without a socket for a CPU. Now, the photograph that you're looking at right now is one of two main sockets that you will find on a motherboard. The socket holds and connects the central processing unit to the rest of the motherboard, but this particular socket, you'll notice, has tiny holes in it, and it is described as a pin grid array socket. The holes are in the socket, the pins are on the CPU. The other kind of socket is one in which everything's reversed. The pins are actually in the socket on the motherboard, and you've not really got holes as such on the CPU, but you've got these tiny conduction points. It's referred to as a land grid array socket. Please remember the pins are on the socket. So, we've talked about a lot of things, and I want us to put them all together so that you can sort of visualize where everything is. Now, the first diagram I've got here is one showing the CPU, the memory slots, the graphics card, all being coordinated with the Northbridge chipset, so it's responsible for controlling all of those. And we've got the Southbridge chipset, basically responsible for everything else on the motherboard. Input, output ports, BIOS, etc. Very important. So, in summary, we've talked about the important components that you can find on a motherboard. They include the expansion slots, the memory slots, the input-output ports, the CPU socket, the port for attaching disks, whether they be hard disk drives or optical storage devices, the BIOS chip, and of course the transistors, capacitors, integrated circuits, and conduction tracks that basically ties everything together. Okay, I want to thank you for listening to this presentation of Tech for Everyone. Please remember that the PDF study guide is free and available at www.t2g.net/training. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.